In a completely different direction. We got Pearl Jam for the second time, guys. Their second album, second time covering it. We're going to be doing verses. In the montage, you heard dis. All right, Matt, run those numbers for me.
All right, so Verses by Pearl Jam comes in at number 63 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums, number 6 in 1993, number 331 of all time. It's Pearl Jam's second highest rated album behind 1991's 10. Did not make Rolling Stone's list, and Pearl Jam is listed as the number 54th highest rated artist on Best Ever Albums.
Gotcha. Okay, well, we have already done a long form bio on Pearl Jam, so I will not go as long on this one as some other ones. This is, as I said before, the second Pearl Jam album. They have 10 total. Their most recent one was from just this year, in the year of our Lord 2024. It is named Dark Matter. And this one being 93, 10 was released in 1991. So from a spacing perspective. And it's important to know that it was spaced about a year and a half after 10, because a lot of this album is defined by where Pearl Jam was at in their headspace. They famously were not super big fans of being a big band, and they started to do a lot of things. Naming their album Verses was one. Creating a cover of an album in which a sheep was trying to poke its way through fence in a stark view was not unintentional. That was designed to sort of show how they felt. They no longer made videos beginning with this album, which
Oh,
was
really? Wow.
pretty. Yeah, it sounds like this might be where Matt and my experience, Josh, is a little different than yours. I can
Yeah.
remember just how shocking it was that Pearl Jam didn't make videos because everybody did, and also Pearl Jam had two major videos in Even Flow and Jeremy that just about anybody who was a kid of that era could tell you saw about a jillion times, right? And so many people, I think, bought 10 from hearing
Mm-hmm.
those, either watching those videos or hearing the song on the radio. But yes, this was the beginning where they made a conscious decision to not put any more videos together. They also did not really do promotional efforts for this.
Wow.
That didn't stop it from selling a massive shit ton of albums, though. It sold 950,378 copies in its first 5 days on sale, guys, which was the most for any album sold in its first week since SoundScan began tracking sales data in 1991, and it held that record for 5 years afterwards. It was number one on the Billboard 200 for 5 weeks, which was the longest any Pearl Jam album has ever been number one on the charts, and it has been certified 7 times platinum by the RIAA and has over 7 million copies sold in just the United States alone. And kind of the best way to think about this album was Pearl Jam feeling the pressure to kind of live up to 10 and how successful it was, and feeling kind of trapped and boxed in by fame. And this was just a really interesting period for Pearl Jam because they made a conscious decision to try to make a more aggressive album. There's crazy stories like Eddie Vedder is like sleeping in his car and at like the sauna of the studio and stuff to keep his intensity to sing for this stuff, which is like the classic, like Eddie Vedder
Mm-hmm.
uh, thing. They go to a studio in Nicasio, California, to begin recording. Some of the band members, most notably their drummer at the time, Dave Abruzzese. I have to say that slowly because it's a tough name to say. And he was the drummer from 91 to 95. He loved recording there, but Eddie Vedder hated it. And I think Dave Abruzzese famously like clashed with the other band members and ended up leaving the band. So that might have been one of their earliest conflicts right there. But a couple people come into their radius. I just mentioned they have a new drummer on this album, and also this was the first Pearl Jam album that had Brendan O'Brien produce it, who becomes a producer who's sort of intricately linked to stuff that Pearl Jam does for many, many years. Afterwards, they booked one song at a time, so they just recorded one song, got it to completion, and then as soon as they recorded it, O'Brien mixed the song when it was finished. So they went track by track through it instead of just banging it out. They all the songs were developed out of jam sessions, and they kind of just they looked at this as like they recorded this as a very much a band at this point. It's kind of like they were just jamming, and then Eddie Vedder comes in, starts singing, and kind of they felt like it did a very good job of capturing where their headspace was, and it was almost like therapeutic in some ways. Um, for them. But Eddie Vedder famously is quoted as saying, "The second one that was the one I enjoyed making the least. I just didn't feel comfortable in the place we were at because it was very comfortable. I didn't like that at all."
Hmm.
But um,
He was uncomfortable being comfortable.
he was uncomfortable being comfortable, yes. And Jeff Ament said that toward the end it got fairly intense and that the band tried to make it as uncomfortable for Eddie Vedder as we could. That was what was happening there.
What a
And
head
so
case.
there's a lot of pressure there and stuff like that along the way. Some of the songs have sort of political bends to them as well. There's child abuse on Daughter. There's an anti-gun song on Glorified G. There's racism on WMA, and then there's sort of not anti, but a critique of the media on Blood.
Hmm.
There's a bunch of storytelling songs that were by design, to kind of pay tribute to some of Pearl Jam's heroes, people like Neil Young and Woody Guthrie, Bruce Springsteen, people like that. Yeah, and so that is Verses. I'll kind of stop there. After this, by the way, I probably should postscript. They were coming off of a massive tour from 10, and they go on another massive tour after this. And during that tour, they famously took a look at some of the stuff on their tickets and saw in their mind,
Oh yeah.
ridiculous amount of money Ticketmaster was taking out of the tickets and began their very long war with Ticketmaster about service charges. I remember that vividly because I remember basically standing in line at a movie theater type scenario like you used to back in the day to get tickets, and you had to call a number to get the tickets. It was quite a
Yep.
thing to go see Pearl Jam at that time. So the first time I ever saw Pearl Jam was shortly after Versus and before Vitology. And it was, on one hand it was a pain in the ass. On the other hand, I respected what they were doing. So you were kind of willing to put up with it because you were like, yeah, man, they're sticking it to it, these bastards
Yeah.
from Ticketmaster. And when you think about their heroes, somebody like Tom Petty famously fought this fight too about cost of albums and stuff like that. So, yeah, and they ended up canceling their 1994 summer tour because Ticketmaster had such a lock on venues they couldn't really put one together.
Wow.
So, yep.
Crazy.
So there we go. And that was kind of the deal with Pearl Jam. They went from being one of the biggest bands in the world to still a big band, but almost kind of made themselves an indie band by choice. And it was not immediate, and certainly not at this point of their career when they were still one of the biggest bands in the world. But by the end of the 90s, they'd accomplished their goals. So, Josh, I know that you have been pretty vocal about loving grunge so far, and also unlike Matt and I, who were knee deep in grunge at the time, you don't necessarily have that real time experience
Yep.
with it. What'd you think of this one?
Oh man, this album. I'm glad we're discovering Pearl Jam because it's like for the first time for me, and this album is awesome. Like,
Well,
I
not we,
think.
you. I
Well,
think
yes,
it's
I
fairly
I
new.
meant yeah, right. Me, the neophyte, and comparing it, going in chronological order to at least on these early albums, is really rewarding, and I just really like what they're doing on this album. I think I like this album better than 10. I don't know if that's a popular opinion or not, but every time, every song on my notes is like great guitar, great drum, great bass. Like Eddie Vedder's voice is really intense and kind of, he seems really able to do different things with it, not just the famous Jarl, but he's also like screaming on this album, and he has such a power in his voice that accompanies the the songs and the tempo of the songs. I really like how a lot of these songs start. They have either like a really great riff, or they start with like a bass part alone, or a drum, like really fast drum part that kicks in everything. So they all start really great. They just I wasn't familiar with any of these songs except for Daughter. I think I knew, maybe Dissident, but it's pretty coming to it pretty fresh. I like the wah wah guitar on Blood. That was really great. At the end of the day, this album is just great because the guitar's great, Eddie Vedder's great. They're all the members of the band are really firing on all cylinders for me. I just like the energy that they bring. I like the slightly kind of political stance. I definitely picked that up in the lyrics on some of the songs, like especially like Glorified G and WMA. And I don't know, they're just tapping into something that I really respond to. I think at the end, it's just this rock and roll sound that's slightly grungy, slightly bluesy, and they're doing great things. I don't really have any critiques on this album. Every song is pretty strong, and it whizzed by for me both the times I listened to it. It was also good music to work out to, so that's always a plus. It's great. Thumbs up. Awesome. This band is really good.
Take forever, Josh.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. It was great going back to this. I listened to the hell out of this record back in the day. It's a really raw record to me. And like Josh, you mentioned Eddie Vedder's voice, and certainly at a song like Blood, like there's some vocal parts that he's doing in that song that are just like, holy crap, how is he talking after that? He's letting it all out. But yeah, this seems like a raw album. I hesitate to say there's more energy here than in their first album, but there's maybe on certain songs there is. But there's also some more. They have like acoustic stuff. When you start doing Daughter or Elderly. You never heard of the Elderly Woman Behind the Counter song, Josh?
Maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
I remember that song being played a lot. At least that was, or at least it was a popular one in where I was in school in college. But so you have like kind of, so they bring it down a little bit in those songs, and then they finish out, they kind of do the Pearl Jam thing where the last song is this really mellow kind of like, I don't know if it's a trippy song, but it's definitely taking it down several notches with Indifference, right? Especially after coming off a song like Leash. But that's kind of how Pearl Jam winds up their records, with a much lower key vibe. But yeah, they come right out shooting. The first couple songs with Go and Animal, it's like all balls out with the guitar, and then there's great bass lines in here too, like particularly with like WMA and Rats. Like Jeff Amen's really getting his moment to shine with some of those songs, and I love the drumming with the bass of WMA that just kind of permeates the song. It's a really cool, unique thing that they're doing. So there's some growth here with the band as well in terms of just, kind of expanding their sound. The production's a little bit better than their previous record. And it's got one of my all-time favorite Pearl Jam songs, In Rearview Mirror. I just love the way that song builds. Yep. It's got just a really cool guitar part, the notes that he's playing on top of it, and the way that they build to the chorus where he screams out Rearview Mirror at the end. It's like a perfect song. It's a top 3 Pearl Jam song for me, for sure. And so yeah, it's a really strong record. This is Pearl Jam at their at their peak, I would say. These first few albums that they do in the 90s is really, them hitting on all cylinders. And yeah, it was weird that they definitely made a conscious effort to not be in the spotlight, that was something that they were definitely not comfortable with. And, it's too bad I think the Ticketmaster thing didn't really yield many positive results. I mean, we're still paying ridiculous service fees, and, it's not like Pearl Jam solved the ticket.
The war's not over.
Yeah, no, it's in fact they lost it big time, but props to them for trying to do something about it. And yeah, it's just one of those things that Pearl Jam to me is one of those bands that I know people that it's hands down their favorite band. They see them as many times as they can. It's just like, it's like an obsession with a lot of people. I never got quite there. But it's just when I revisit some of these albums, and when I see that the couple times that I've seen them live, I'm just constantly reminded, holy crap, that's another song. They have another great song. They just have so many good songs, and this one's chock full of it. Big thumbs up for me.
Yeah, my first, I've listened to this album a bajillion times. I've always considered this album to be a little truer to Pearl Jam's roots than the first one in some ways, because this one is a much more rockin' album. I think my takeaway always with this is I always found it kind of weird that Pearl Jam was called grunge because unlike Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and deeper cut bands like Mudhoney and stuff that had that sludgy sort of sound, and even Nirvana, even though they were in some ways punk oriented, I always felt like Pearl Jam was much more of a rock band,
Yeah.
and this they're moving much more into rock that resembles 70s rock and plugged in rock than necessarily what I would consider to be grunge rock on this. That's not a knock either. But it's a very aggressive album, in your face album, I would say. It starts off with Go and Animal, two songs that basically like frantically come at you, and then Daughter and Glorified G kind of calm it down a little bit. They're a little funkier, and then Dissident, winds it up a little bit, but in a different way. It's a little bit more bluesy, and then you always wait for it to go back to where Go and Animal were, but even though tonally it's there, it never quite gets as heavy musically again. Or like, if you get what I'm saying, right? It
Hmm.
kind of there's weighty lyrics, and it's not that it's not plugged in, but it
Blood
never
probably
reaches.
Blood probably gets heavy as those would. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
that's
a heavier song.
probably in fairness. Yeah, I think you're right. It's there, but you never see that you know outburst of 6 minutes of energy like at the beginning. I'd say I've always liked Go and Animal probably the best on this, and felt like it kind of tailed off a little bit after it. I like this album. I would not say this is my favorite Pearl Jam album. In some ways, I don't think it's got as many really great songs as 10 does, and I don't think it's got sort of the vibe. And I won't. I don't really kind of want to get into it because I want to continue Josh's journey through Pearl Jam. But some of the other albums become very Vitology is different than this, and then you get No Code and Yield, which are different directions and stuff. And I like this one, but I don't know if I like this one as much as the albums that sandwich it on either ends. But yeah, my real takeaway here was how much this is Pearl Jam as a capital R rock band as opposed to a grunge band, I would say. But a lot of the pieces are here. The guitar work on this is excellent. Um, Pearl Jam, I've always felt the drums, even though they've had good drummers like Matt Cameron later and Jack Irons and stuff, I always feel the drums don't pop out to me as much as they do on other albums. Pearl Jam to me is very much two things: the guitar and bass parts, merged with Eddie Vedder's voice. It's a guitar rock band with a iconic lead singer.
Hmm.
And once again, I think we've mentioned because the Jarl got so copied, you forget that Eddie Vedder was the Jarl, right? Like he was patient zero of the Jarl, and it isn't until you do the journey that you realize that, and you realize how sort of special Eddie Vedder's voice and charisma as a lead singer was. And once again, just like that Janet Jackson album we covered before, this was a massive album. I heard it
Mm.
all the time,
Hmm.
all the time. In fact, it didn't surprise me at all, Matt, that you bought both because I can't imagine how many times in just the video block eras when it was not by genre, you could have heard,
Yep.
again followed by, an old cut of Even Flow, right? And that's why it was crazy because basically then you didn't have it happen because Pearl Jam just didn't make out, videos anymore. And so, and I'm sorry, I should go back. Back when you would get like Even Flow with a Rhythm Nation 1814 song, right? That would be there. But then on this, you had all these videos from Janet Jackson, but none from Pearl Jam. That's kind
Hmm.
of what I was trying to say. I apologize. And yet, when you turned on the radio, this album, Daughter, Dissident, Animal, Go, Elderly Woman, those were all on the radio like all the time, at least in the alternative radio stations near me. I think Elderly Woman became a little bit more popular once like Pearl Jam released those 78 jillion,
Oh yeah.
live albums
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
stuff, and that was always like a sing-along staple for their fans. That's when I remember it kind of moving from
But
not deeper cut because it was on the radio, but
they would also become known even though they weren't doing videos. But I remember they did Rearview Mirror on Saturday Night Live, and it was just
right.
like their performances were so great,
Hmm.
that became the video in a way. That stuff
Well, and they had
that got
Rockin' in
played
the Free World was there. That's when
was
they
with
played
Neil
that at the
Young. Yeah.
MTV Music
Yep.
Awards. They had Yellow Ledbetter floating around at this time, which was on none of their albums. So they had all
Right.
kinds of stuff. Just that was like the same time as this, but not on the album. But it was like another single.
Hmm.
Yep.
So Yeah, and keep in mind Temple of the Dog was in between 10 and this, so they were just kind of all over the place at this point. And you're right, this is sort of like when they're probably at their biggest as a band because they're riding high off of 10 and they toured off of it, and this is the next big album. So,
And this is where they were
but yeah,
probably getting
easy thumbs up.
yeah, they're probably starting to get more influence from Eddie Vedder here as well, because the first album was written, all the music was written before he was really in the band,
Hmm.
or most of it was anyway. He did the lyrics later on, so this is kind of like starting from scratch. He's starting to get more. It doesn't take long. It used to be Stone Gossard's. It was kind of like he was the leader of the band, and then after like the first or second album, it was like, okay, now it's Eddie Vedder's taking the lead on the direction of what they're doing. So you're starting to get more of his influence happening as well.
Hmm. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
easy thumbs up, even though I don't like it quite as much as 10.
And yeah, I know what you're saying, John, about, or I hear what you're saying about the drummer not being as great, but I feel like either with the way the songs are constructed, or maybe just how it's mixed, like I feel like I've noticed the drum and the bass a lot more on this album, and or maybe they just have a chance
The
to
drum is mixed
sign
up front.
Show. Yeah.
The drum is mixed up front. There's just isn't a lot interesting going on with the drum,
Yeah.
is how I describe it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I was just able to pick them out more. I can't always do that, or maybe it's just that they got kind of like solo spotlights at times, and maybe that's influencing me. But I did like how kind of the overall production on this album also.
Yeah, well, this is the Brendan O'Brien production, and he's going to be a part of the band for a long time. He didn't just produce Pearl Jam. I think I was reading about him earlier this week, and they said he was the go-to guy to make a record in a few days for $1,500 was how they described him. So,
Oh wow.
he did Blood Sugar Sex Magic. He did Core by Stone Temple Pilots for two other albums.
Hmm.
If you want to know, he also did Mirrorball, the Pearl Jam and Neil Young combination album, and
Oh.
he did the Temple of the Dog album. He's got a fascinating mix of things. Like he did like Get a Grip by Aerosmith at this time. He did 100% Fun, Matt, by Matthew Sweet. He did Evil Empire.
Mm-hmm.
Oh wow.
Like plus all of Pearl Jam's albums after this. He also did later, he did like all of the famous Limp Bizkit and Korn albums. He did Train Drops of Jupiter. So I mean he's a
Wow.
genre mixer. It's while those albums sound different, when you start to listen to them, you can definitely pick up elements of his production style, I would say. And one for me, a piece of it is that he mixes the guitar and the drum together, I would say, and then the vocals are layered sort of over it, almost like in isolation. That would be how I'd describe his production style for me, at least. But that's just how I hear it.
Hmm.
But maybe as we go into some of those albums, we'll revisit that a little bit. I don't think he has like a signature sound, but he was the go-to guy for new metal, just so that you get an idea of that. So, yeah,
Okay. Good
yeah,
note. Nice.
Mhm.
Okay, thumbs
Yeah.
up from all of us. It sounds
Mm-hmm.
like.
Hmm.